So I'm Sharon Redmon. I am here now in the North Kitsap School District and as a special education teacher and doing some other things on the side for them as well. And so we're here today to really talk about this idea of interactive reading and how AAC users build their schema. So which is that background knowledge, and how do we go about doing that so that we can participate in the comprehensive literacy for all ideas of that interactive reading, and looking at shared reading with our AAC users, and how do we do that when we're talking about putting the crowd in the car, and we'll be looking at some of those things. So I'm glad that you're here with me today. And just a little bit about me. Like I said, I'm now in the North Kitsap School District. I'm working as a special education teacher. I'm also a assistive technology specialist and an ATP through RESNA. And I've been working in the field for, technically 20 years, but I've been working in the field for over 30 years. So a few part-time places here and there. So, but I have always come back to assistive technology and working with kiddos that are complex and have those complex communication needs and those complex bodies. So I hope that today you can take some things that I have learned and be able to implement them into your own practice. So here we go, working on this background knowledge and schema. Our students have had very little access to, in what we know in the research, to building some of these background knowledges, to being active participants, and that will increase that background knowledge. And we know that we need that background knowledge and access to vocabulary and understanding to make meaning and participate in those comprehension activities. That is for all readers to be successful. And students with complex communication needs and complex bodies are no different. And we know what the research is there. So what are we going to do together today? Well, we're going to explore, so how do we do that? You know, we have different materials out there in curriculum like Readtopia that is out there that we can do those comprehensive literacy for all activities and have the anchor activities. We now have connected text at age appropriate levels, and that is at their level and our students' levels, whether they're an emergent user or emergent, AAC communicator, or whether they have higher level communication within their AAC journey. And so we want to know, how now do we do that? Do we build these things with these anchor texts, connected texts? So that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to touch on crowd in the car for those interactive readings, but really we're going to be building that schema and that vocabulary. We're going to be looking at that today. Next week, Thursday on the 6th, I'll be going over more in depth about now we've done all this work to build these activities. So then how do we then put them into the crowd in the car, and what does that look like for interactive and shared reading? So we're going to be really building those vocabularies. We're going to look at tools such as descriptive teaching techniques that have been created by Gail Van Tatenhove, and then also the expanding expression tool, which I use a lot in my practice, both of those when we're looking at building that vocabulary, when we're looking at finding words on our talkers. And then again, how do we make this engaging? How do we grab our users? How do we get them excited to be learning and to be wanting to communicate, to be wanting to make comments on text, to be wanting to ask questions and respond, to do those crowd in the car activities? So how do we get them to get engaged with that vocabulary? And so we're going to look at a few of the things that I've done, and hopefully you also have you have questions at the end or have some things you want to share with the group, I would love that. I'm always loving the idea of learning and sharing together. So we'll have some time at the end to do that. So if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat, and Sue will kind of monitor that, but we'll come back at the end for those questions. So just want to start out with some shared language and shared ideas and baseline. I feel like this is really the idea of presuming competence and potential is in everything that we do as educators. And it's really important to be able to not just talk that talk, but really walk that. And what does that look like? Well, I hope that you can see some of the things that I have done to really make sure that I'm just not talking that I'm presuming that competence, but that I'm walking that walk and doing that and presuming competence and potential. We know everyone can learn to read and write. We're going to be learning and seeing examples of attributing meaning, and that because print has meaning, always modeling, aided language stimulation, aided language input, whatever you want to call it. But what does that look like when we're working with vocabulary and working in icon and coming up with our icon sequences and having some smart charts, things like that. Modeling not just icons, on our AAC systems, but also looking at modeling spelling and using letters and modeling punctuation, modeling writing. We want to make sure that we provide access to words for reading and writing, which means icons and letters on an AAC user's device. We want to provide meaningful activity to connected, rich, authentic text. We need to make sure that if we're looking at our kiddos that are in 8th or 9th grade and where they may be emergent learners, emergent AAC users, even emergent readers, that we're not using necessarily Go Dog Go. That's really appropriate in the elementary, but I don't know if that's appropriate. I don't feel that's appropriate to use at a middle school, high school level. What is appropriate is to use authentic connected text at their level. And so what I love is I've used products from the Reading Avenue through Boardmaker and then also Readtopia, which really gives me all of those tools and meaningful connected text. And so we'll see how we use some of those in a little bit. And then again, we accept all levels of communication attempts. We celebrate, we provide meaning, and we teach, right? So many of our students, the first time they get an AAC device, they haven't had rich language modeling using AAC. And you need to, if you want, I love this quote from Kelly Fonner, like if you want a picture, a symbol user, you have to model to be a symbol user too. And that's just, it's true. We need to be able to model this, and we have to teach this in everything we do. So modeling AAC throughout our activities to have readers and writers is so important. So these are the areas we're going through today. This is kind of like, I can't wait to show you some of the fun things, but we need to kind of build up some of our own background knowledge. So we have this foundation and looking at the science of reading, and that's where our pendulum is right now, right? So we are here at the science of reading. We're looking at structured literacy, and how does that work? And how does that combine with comprehensive literacy for all, Karen Erickson's book? So really it does. There is, if we were to layer these on top of and really looking at Scarborough's rope, reading rope, we would see the same threads throughout within our comprehensive literacy for all from Karen Erickson. So today what we're going to be looking at in reading, writing, listening, speaking in the process of reading is all so connected and tangled up like this rope. And so I really like this description of just really starting to maybe pull these threads apart just a little bit, maybe not breaking apart like the picture suggests, but just pulling apart so we can just examine one of the threads of Scarborough's reading rope. So which we're going to be focusing really on that upper strand of looking at and building that background knowledge, right? So we know we have a lot of work to do for our emergent readers and emergent AAC users, and whether they are more comprehensive in their journey through that. But we know we still have that lower strand of that word recognition, phonological awareness, decoding, sight word recognition. We know we need that, right? But today we're just going to take apart, because we only have 50 minutes, an hour together, is to really take apart and look at that one strand, recognizing that it is complex, that reading and writing is a complex piece. So we're going to stick to that upper strand of Scarborough's rope. And looking at that background, that schema, that vocabulary knowledge, and building that so that we can come back and we can look at that car in the crowd. So we are crowd in the car. I always reverse them so that we can have students participate. So I just mentioned earlier, like, how does Scarborough's reading rope and really that comprehensive literacy for all combine? Well, we know that there's, when you look at chapter 7 and the reading comprehension and vocabulary instruction is on the rope, right? We have, that is part of the science of reading. We have a lot of data on what that looks like for our neurotypical kids, and also, you know, right now, our Bible, if you would say, of comprehensive literacy instruction, Karen Erickson and David Copenhagen's work. This book changed my teaching. If you haven't read it yet, please go out and buy it. Mine is, you know, has, you know, highlighted and penciled, and there's notes sticking out all over it. And that's what it should be. It's a rich, rich text to be able to go back and use. And I feel like I have just touched the surface of that reading. And I need to go back and reread it again. So if you haven't had a chance, please go back, or please go and get that. Also, SETC did, I'm not sure if it was last year or the year before, did a book study on comprehensive literacy for all. And so there are webinars that you can go back and check out that separated out by chapter, which was really fun to participate in those as well. So if you don't want to do it yourself, you can go back and look at those webinars. There's also Facebook groups on comprehensive literacy for all. I love it that right now I'm in a Facebook group with that Kate Ahern started, that's comprehensive literacy for all, and the science of reading. And so some really nice, rich discussions on how we're putting the science of reading and how the science of reading is incorporated into comprehensive literacy for all. So we are going to be here. So we know this, that students struggle with this comprehension of vocabulary, this receptive language, often taught in isolation, which is very hard for our students to be able to gather meaning, right? And so we need to increase this vocabulary in order to increase our students' comprehension to authentic connected text. So what is that schema? Well, we need to look at that background knowledge of things and experiences that often our students with complex bodies just have not had the opportunity and the amount of opportunity to have those rich experiences. So we need to find a way to bring those experiences to our students. So how can we do that to build their schema? So we are gonna next. So how I have done it, using, like I mentioned before, I've used Readtopia in the past and hope to continue to use Readtopia in the future in my new placement. So what I love about using a product like this is that it is based in one, the comprehensive literacy for all, and Karen Erickson is right there with building wings and helping create and has created ground up these materials. And so they provide what we need to build schema for our students. I felt like I just needed to take it a little bit further. Because when I looked at, and I loved the anchor activities, our connected text, authentic text, and the vocabulary, I felt like I needed to kind of step back a little bit, because what was happening is that when I got to the interactive reading and shared reading activities, and I would ask a question and then wait, my students would look at me and they wouldn't actively participate in this car in the crowd. And so when I would lead with a comment and wait, and then ask for a question and wait, and wanting them to come back and respond, I wasn't getting that active participation. And so I had to kind of think about that for a minute and say, well, how come? Why am I not doing this? I feel like I'm going to go back a slide. I'm bringing the anchor activities, and we're looking at some of this vocabulary, but I recognized very quickly that we needed to slow down and focus really clearly on this vocabulary. And so how was I going to go about doing that? How was I going to make it so that we could have active participation in the crowd in the car activities? So one of the tools that I found, and I have been using for years, excuse me, is this tool called the Expanding Expression tool. And if you've ever used it, and then I'm sure you're a fan, it is a really pretty amazing tool to use for comprehension and building that comprehension. So it is I use this tool as visual support for helping us build that vocabulary, for expanding what that category is, helping with categorization. I also use this tool not just to build our vocabulary and background, but to give us a structure that we can use to, when we're watching a video, when we're watching, and you'll see some of the videos that we bring up, when we're looking at what the word heart means, how do we go about describing and really using the words that I have in my talker? And what I found really quickly is when I'm using this visual support, and when we're building and expanding excuse me, our vocabulary, and that sometimes our students don't necessarily have the word for tornado in their talker, right? Or don't know where that is, but they do know what spinning means. They do know what does a tornado do? Well, it spins. What does it look like? It's dark. What is it made out of? Rain and clouds. They have some access to these core vocabulary words. And what do we want to do? We know that core is so important, and that we need to make sure that we have, and our students know how to access their core so that they can use this tool to help them describe the word that we're building, to build our background knowledge, to build our vocabulary, really, and building our schema. Gail Van Tatenhoven, she uses this descriptive teaching technique. If you ever get a chance to take one of her webinars that talks about descriptive teaching, please do. I expanded the Expanding Expression tool by using some of her materials, where we look at, okay, I put it in the what else do I know? What does the word start with? What does the word sound like? What else do we know about this word? How could we build that word and find that word using and spelling it out to help us figure out what that word is. So really utilizing some of those descriptive teaching techniques to build that vocabulary, right? So AAC users, they need to know where the words are in order to use the words, right? They need to have that practice in icon location and know where that is so that they can access those icons. Otherwise, they become passive participants in when we are doing interactive and shared reading activities. So how do I go about that? Well, I start with a connected text. And if you haven't noticed, I kind of had a little bit of a theme going with the Kansas and the yellow brick road, and maybe that predicted, maybe you didn't catch on to that. That's okay. But this was the authentic text that we had used in the piece that I'm going to be showing of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And so we have our connected text. And so now when we're looking at vocabulary about how to talk about in the first chapter, about that the house spins around and they are scared and because of the tornado is coming. Well, if you don't, especially for us that live in Washington State that don't necessarily have a lot of background knowledge in being in what tornadoes are, because we don't have them very often here, we need to find some activities that work. And so what I do is I try to bring in lots of videos. And so that and you don't even necessarily have to have the sound on the videos. I try to find one really quick. We watch it, and as the video is going through, we start talking about it and using some brainstorming and using what we notice and what we see by utilizing the EET tool. So here was my friend Eli, where we have all our materials. We're just starting our session. We're just starting to recognize by using this that we needed to build more vocabulary. And so we started with what my district used for their GE curriculum. And part of the language that was used was I notice, and so we wanted to bring that in. So that's what we started with. What do I notice? Which is awesome, because part of the EET tool is I see, what is it? What do we see? What does it look like? So what do I notice? So we also, for our students, want to make sure that everyone has access to the words that are contextual and within this group. So here, my friend Callie she uses eye gaze. And so we're assessing her for a dynamic display device for eye gaze, but we didn't have that. So we made these. We put the words in there. We made it to where she looks at the group and then she looks at the color that tells us which picture she's wanting in that group. Very similar to her ABC board and her numbers. So we're mimicking that pattern. I look to the group and then I look to the color to tell you which icon, which picture I want to talk about. And we model. We do a lot of modeling when we are introducing this vocabulary, when we're looking at building our schema, when we're looking at utilizing the EET tool. A lot of modeling happens during this time, and a lot of teaching happens. So here we used a video in the background of black birds. We were talking about the birds that came, and that kind of stemmed from a question, what do scarecrows do? So we started in our book introducing the characters and finding the scarecrow. Well, what do scarecrows do? Well, they scare away birds. And they were like, well, what kind of birds? And so we started getting some really great questions. Well, let's go find out. Well, they scare away blackbirds. And so using our anchor activities within Readtopia and the videos that they have, and then just pausing a minute, going and getting more videos so that we could just take a breath and take a look at what that vocabulary is and be able to describe that. Scarecrow, weird, not in someone's talker. It wasn't there. So they couldn't even use the word scarecrow to talk if we were talking and doing a shared or interactive reading, and for them to respond or to say something during this chapter. That wasn't in their talker. So I could go and put it in their talker, or we could teach our children to use and to describe what a scarecrow is, so that when they don't have the word, right? And we didn't know that they wanted to our students talk about a certain thing. They know how to go and use the words that they do have to start describing these things and describing these words and having the background knowledge to be able to do that. So it was super powerful to have the videos playing in the background, pressing pause, using the EET tool to talk about the group, right? This is the group of a bird, right? And so what does this bird do? Well, it flies and it quacks and it eats. You know, what does it look like? This is so important for us to know, that we can talk about its size, its shape, its color, that those are all words that we use to describe something, right? Of what it looks like. And then what is it made out of, right? Sometimes we don't always use all of the EE2 tools, but sometimes instead of saying what is it made out of, because like you'll see when we get to the heart, they're like muscle and skin and blood, yes, or we could talk about the parts. So that's what we did here when we were talking about the bird. We talked about what parts they were. So, well, parts of a bird, their wings, and they have eyes, and they have teeth. And so now we're going into their talkers, and we're using core words to describe and access parts of their body. Super important for our students to know where that is in a fun and engaging way. Instead of maybe saying, okay, tell me what hurts. Does your finger hurt? Like during a traumatic moment, like now we get to have that time to explore that language, explore parts of the body and parts that we can describe through this text and through our building of our vocabulary. I loved that, and next week when we meet, we'll talk a little bit more about some of these STEM activities that we did. So we built a scarecrow. What does it feel like? What's inside of a scarecrow? What are they made out of? Really kind of helped us then come up with the steps of how to make a scarecrow, which was really fun and engaging for them to do. Then they had all the words. We had a lot of words to be able to talk about the scarecrow, to talk about what the scarecrow does. Take a drink. Excuse me, I'm talking too much. Well, it's part of a webinar, right? Okay, so utilizing this tool, and I just kind of want to come back to it, is that when we're expanding this this concept and that green group, right? The main idea, the main vocabulary word of a blackbird, we don't always have to use all of the pieces, and that's okay. That's okay to do. And it's really fun to be able to now come in and with my students be able to see some of the things that they start thinking about and they start utilizing, you know. So we've done a lot of practicing. When I'm here, I am modeling on my talker. Well, my scarecrow is helping me model because he became a very big hit in our classroom. So scarecrow models like, you know, what do I see? Well, I see that the bird is the color black. I see the color black, you know, so I'm going to put that on there. I wonder where you could find that. Could you find that? Could you find that on your Tucker? And sometimes I even switch back and forth and have their AAC device. Here we're using LAMP Words for Life. So I would have that on and project that onto the screen and even show the icon sequence. It was something that was unfamiliar to them. It really also helped my paraeducators really understand that when we're using core words and core language on how to be able to access that and help describe things when they're in the classroom with their students, to help their students participate in discussions even within the classroom. So it really, this tool really helped kind of even be generalized and be used in lots of variety of settings for my students, which was very exciting. All right, let's see some more examples. So I love this. I wonder if it's gonna play. No, it didn't. It worked just earlier. There it is. When we were doing, we had the picture and a video of the heart, right? But when we were talking about the Tin Man and we were talking about the heart, we also used some audio where I would play in the room a heartbeat. So sometimes it doesn't even have to just be visual. It can be auditory, where we had the heartbeat going and kids could hear that and they'd be like, what is that? It's making a sound. How could I describe that? Right? What does that sound like? Not just what does it look like? So being able to bring some of these in. You know, I loved the EET tool that we used. One of my verbal students, when we were describing the Tin Man and describing the character, and I had the line there blank, they said, it's a robot. It looks like a robot. I'm like, that's awesome. That is your background knowledge coming to life. Like that, it does kind of look like a robot. And if you've never read this book or seen the movie, you wouldn't know that it's a Tin Man. That wouldn't make any sense to you. So we looked at this character and so we're like, well, let's see. I wonder if it is a robot. I don't know. Let's describe it. And then when we went back to read, then we were able to determine, was our guess right? You know, did we thought it was a robot? Was that right? Or was that not right? So it was a pretty amazing moment to be able to then go back into the text, read the text during a shared reading to be able to see if our prediction was right, that the character was a robot. So, but this was really cool. It doesn't have to be fancy. You know, now what I have the EET tool on big, round laminated cards that have magnets on them. And then they can be, I put that on my board so that I don't have to draw it out every time because my drawing isn't all that great, that it can be there visually for them. So, but I didn't have that at first, and that's okay. I used what we had. Because the point is for us to do the work, to presume the competence and not let things become barriers for the important work, right? It'd be great to have it all perfect and ready to go, but it wasn't. And that's okay. That's okay. We just started. So really loved that when we got down, we did the looking. We then, when you project the images of the authentic text or project the images of a heart beating on the screen, and if you have an interactive whiteboard or have the ability to do that, it becomes so rich in content because you can stop that heart beating. You can draw around it with your whiteboard markers, right? You can be able to point out and bring out details. And that's what we did with the Tin Man, being able to bring out like, all right, well, let's look at all of his parts. What parts do you see? Well, he has a triangle for a hat. He has arms. And then we circled this thing that he was holding on to, and no one knew what that really was. And so we talked about how it was, maybe it was sharp, maybe it could cut, because we have those words in our talker. We didn't have the word axe. So what happened is that just going from the Tin Man brought up more vocabulary that we needed to go back and explore, right? And then as we were talking about the heart, I love that my students started, when they didn't even have the words, they didn't know where the words, but they knew something close, that then we could start making those connections, that we could attribute meaning, that we were able to, and I think this is the core, and you're going to see this video of what presuming competence is that you're going to see my friend Lisa, and she doesn't say heart. She doesn't say that. We could have said, no, that's not what we asked, like, what do we call this? You know, what is this? We've gone through, we've described it, we've now found it on our talker, you know, or let's look for it on our talker, where, and she didn't have that. She used a different word that made a meaningful connection to her. So, and then we went to attribute meaning. So let me just bring that video up. I'm gonna just press pause for a second so that I can get this.
Times hard.
You're right, she made a connection, didn't she? Maybe she didn't know where heart was on her talker, but she knew where Valentine was, and that to her made a connection.
Valentine.
Yeah, Lisa. Wow, that's so smart.
So, like, she picked heart. Like, it was a Valentine's heart.
You're right, she made a connection.
You didn't see that first part, so I just kind of wanted to come back. So, let me get back. Of course, there we go. Oh, no, there we go. Okay, so she didn't do heart, and her verbal, you know, classmate said, wait a minute, she didn't say heart, but she said Valentine. Like, that was really smart of her she knew where Valentine was. That was important to her, but she didn't know where the heart was. And so us making and attributing meaning and helping her make that connection and saying, yeah, you're right. Absolutely. You have value, and you are using your words and how you know that, and you are adding and contributing to what we're talking about and building this vocabulary. It was a really beautiful moment, and it was super, I'm excited that I got to share that with you. So here's another example. Sometimes we didn't really necessarily use the EET tool, but we were talking about courage, and that was really hard to describe courage using the EET tool. So instead, what we did is we thought maybe we could describe some things that make people feel like they're courage, right? That they have courage. So we looked at what is a growl and what is a groan, and we described some of that sound and how people feel. So then we also looked at, like, I love this image of that little cat with the shadow of a lion, right? The cat is the cat, but he feels what? He feels big. He feels like a tiger. And so we're going to take a look at my friend Eli and what he's doing. We also were really working at this moment in building their sentences and building their communication and with a grammatically correct sentence. So you'll see some of that.
Feels like, eh?
No.
Tiger. He feels like a tiger.
Nice job, Eli. You're right. That's what courage means. It means that he can feel big inside like a tiger.
So having and attributing that meaning for them of what that means to be courage. So to help describe that vocabulary word, and all the time finding where our icons are, using sentence starters to create that so that we could expand how we just not using, so for Eli, not using one word, but expanding that so he can have a whole statement that he can say. All right. So I love this slide. It's one of my favorite slides. So when we were we watched part of the movie, again bringing the anchoring that text with the witch. There's just nothing better than that original movie to kind of like, what does that look like and what does that feel like, and the acting that happens within there. So we took that clip and we really wanted to know, like, what is a witch? What does that mean? What does that look like when we're talking about the Wizard of Oz, that character? Like, what does that mean? How do we build it? Background knowledge and schema around that. And so really taking our time, watching that video multiple times, adding to it, looking at it and saying, okay, let's describe this. So let's look at, Blue Dew. What does this person doing? What is this? And I loved this. It was fire and mean. And one of my friends was like, couldn't get there, didn't know where that icon sequence was. So we wrote it out on the board and we practiced that. And so maybe you had more words that you wanted to say. My friend Lisa, she said that, let me think of the word that she used. It's not up here. She used frustrated. So, and I loved that was one of the feeling words that she has used before to describe her own feelings when she's feeling upset, that she was frustrated. So we really then expand that and look at that and really feel what it means when I say, well, the Wicked Witch, that we have an image that comes into our head, right? We have that background knowledge of watching that movie. We know what that means, that people are not acting nice, and that it makes us scared and that we don't like her. I love that Lisa put that in there. I don't like her. Putting that whole sequence together. Like, those are the feelings that come up when we take a minute to describe and process out what that vocabulary is, so that when we do, again, this is all going back to that authentic text that we're going to go back to, that you'll see next week, of how we now take this vocabulary that we built. And when we start reading those and using other tools to help us read, that we can now have some active participation in that reading, in that interactive, and in that shared reading. It's super important to be able to have words so that you can use the words. And how rich of an experience this is for our students to really be there and be in that. They come up to the board and they were, really touching her face on the board and pointing to different things and describing, where, what they were seeing. And I loved, and again, let me go back, like, I crossed out, like, what is it made out of and what are the parts? We just crossed that out. We didn't need to use all parts of the expanding expression tool because they didn't seem to make sense in this instance. So we didn't use them. But I did want to talk about, like, where do we see the witch? right? This doesn't happen very often. One of my friends said Halloween. You're right. We do see lots of witches at Halloween. Where else do you think we'll see a witch? Well, we're going to see the witch in our book. And then I wrote Wizard of Oz. Yes, we're going to see it in our book. And then we also talked about like, okay, well, maybe you really wanted to say the word and you wanted to have that, but which isn't in your talker. What else could you do? Well, we could say, what does the word sound like? Right? What does it start with? What does the word start with? It starts with a W. Or I could go to my page that has my letter sounds and I could say, "Wah." It starts with a "wah" sound. Okay. So let's see. You don't like her. She's mean and angry, has a green head and face and has ugly teeth, and it starts with a W. I think you're talking about a witch. You're talking about a witch. And then we would have great celebration of being able to find that. Then we would go in and we would spell witch. Darn, you don't have it in your talker. It's a bummer. We'll get it in there. But what else could you do? Well, we could spell it. So we know what it starts with. What do we hear in the center, in the middle? And then what do we hear at the end? What is that final sound? Oh my gosh, witch. That ch sound, that's one of our digraphs we've been working on. You're right, that is there. Let's go and spell that. So then now we can even have a broader conversation about spelling and about using letters to be able to find them. We have letters in our talker, right? We have our icon sequences and we have our icons, but we also have letters. And so how can we use that to help us learn and to write and describe that, that vocabulary? So I'm just going to give you a little sneak preview here of what some of the things that we'll be showing next week. I hope this is one of the things next week that we'll see, and you'll see that my friends got to come up and talk and we talked about it, but we also put a little steam in every activity that we do to really get it engaging, right? And really want them to want to actively participate in the authentic text in the literature. So we made a big, huge paper mache head that represented the Wizard of Oz, and then each kid got to come in and get videoed. And so we used the technology piece in STEAM to be able to create a video of us having a big head, and it was pretty cool. So super fun to be able to bring in a whole bunch of not just the anchor text, not just the EET tool, not just the descriptive teaching, but also now hands-on and really rich experiences that also brought more vocabulary. We were able to talk about green head. Oh, I remember finding that on your talker when we talked about the witch. Yeah, we need to make it green. Let's go find that. Let's talk about that, right? So that we can continue bringing in and generalizing that vocabulary that we have been working so hard in being able to describe. What? Love that. Makes me happy. I love this. I showed you earlier about making meaning in this and being able to do that with my friend Lisa, who didn't know where to find heart, but knew where to find Valentine, right? And so this was another one of those moments of this is walking the walk of presumed competence. So we were talking about describing a throne. We were talking about the Wizard of Oz and how he, is sitting on this throne, and that's important. And so let's describe this throne. So we go through our EET tool. We're describing, we're saying, what else do we know about this? And my friend Lisa went to make into birthday. And at first we're like, birthday. Just give me a minute, birthday. Are you saying? And then it kind of dawned on us, because at first we were kind of like, well, I was really starting to go down the path of like, well, we're not talking about your birthday. I know that's special. I was just about to say that when I had special. And I'm like, wait a minute. Are you saying that birthdays are special? Birthdays are special. And she went straight to yes. You're right. Birthdays are special. Are you saying that sitting on a throne is special? And she said, yes, throne is special. And I said, do you have a throne at home that you sit in when it's your birthday that is special? And she said, yes. And big smiles, like, we got it. We knew, right? I mean, talk about the rigor that happens with that. I just was in a PD this afternoon about talking about rigor and what that means. Like, she took it to another level. She made a huge connection about what throne was. It wasn't just what it looked like, a big chair that was green that stood in the front of the room. It wasn't about that. She took it beyond. She made a huge connection on how that was an important thing, that meant that when someone sits there, they are important, that the Wizard of Oz was important. Just like when it's my birthday and I sit in the special chair, that I'm important. And what a meaningful and beautiful connection that was, because easily we could have just said, no, we're not talking about birthdays. I know you love your birthday, but we're not talking about that, right? I could have not walked the walk of presuming their competence and presuming that she knew what she was talking about. Could have easily dismissed her. But instead, I took a moment to say, I believe and I know that she knows what she's talking about. She is making a connection. She is communicating and making a communication attempt. And I just need to be smarter and figure it out what that she's trying to communicate. And once we were able to do that, once we were able to start saying and believing in our students, it just shifted the whole everyone's perceptions within our classroom. And so that we always now presume that she knows what she's talking about and that there is a connection always that she is making. We just need to be there and figure it out and see if that's connection that is made. Sometimes we've been wrong. Sometimes we're like, I'm not really sure what you're talking about. I'm not really sure what that is. And so what is it that, is it this? And she'll be like, nope, is it this? No. All right, well, then we're going to need to go back and describe it a little bit more because I'm not really sure. Sometimes I'm not able to get it. I just, and that's okay. And so that's where having that communication back and forth is so important. I know we're running out of time. So I just wanted to end with thank you. I appreciate you spending this hour with me today. And as always, what we do in teaching with our AAC students is model, model, model. And I love this even to a scarecrow. This is my little friend Steffi. Her SLP and I were just done with a session with her. And we were talking about what our next steps were and where we felt we needed to go. And so she was there with her talker. She grabbed the flashlight that we use with my other friend when we're modeling her eye gaze. And she just started modeling to the scarecrow. And it was amazing that this just doesn't happen. She was taught. It has been years of modeling with her for her to know how, and look at this, how important it is to model language to someone that is learning it. And the scarecrow needed to learn that language. So she was going to model that for the scarecrow. And that to me is like a teacher big win, like having our students modeling to a scarecrow, that they have learned what the importance of that is. So if my friend Steffi can model to a scarecrow, everyone can model to our students who use AAC. So thank you for coming together, tying it all back up. I know that it's just one piece of Scarborough's rope, just one area of looking at vocabulary, but it is an important piece that really kind of is the building block for us to be able to have meaningful discussion and when we're doing the crowd in the car, and when we are having active participation in our shared reading and interactive reading activities. So lots of resources for you. And this is just to kind of give you a taste of what we're going to be doing next week. I'm going to be really highlighting a lot of, so now we have this information. We built our vocabulary. And so now we're going to be doing some of that work. And how did that work now come into play? And how can we then make and model during interactive and shared reading. So I appreciate you spending that time with me. I'm just gonna stop